Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are grappling with, well, a really provocative argument. It's one that forces us to look in the mirror and challenge some of our deepest assumptions about identity, freedom, and what it even means to be a citizen.
We're diving into a philosophical analysis, a really powerful one titled, Do You Truly Possess the Qualification to Be a Person?
And it was written by Xiaoyang Lin on December 2, 2025. It's breathtakingly rigorous. This isn't just your standard political commentary.
Not at all. This is a comprehensive, logically structured argument.
Yeah.
And you can really feel it's written from the perspective of someone who's, deeply rooted in scientific research and logic. The author demands absolute consistency in a way that's, well, it's pretty rare.
So our mission today is clear. We need to unpack Xiaoyang Lin's core thesis. And that thesis is, it's radical. The author argues that human rights aren't some generous perk or privilege that a government grants you.
No, they are instead an intrinsic logical definition of the human species itself. They're a prerequisite you have to actively embody.
Right, and it's tied inextricably to your capacity for choice, your willingness to accept responsibility, and what the author calls your fundamental integrity or contract spirit.
And the initial insight, the thing that just sets the whole paper in motion, is the author's identification of an immediate logical trap.
Ah, yes.
The moment you ask for human rights, you prove that you fundamentally misunderstand what they are. It's the first real aha moment that forces you to just reevaluate the entire concept.
It really does set the tone for everything that follows. I mean, if you admit that someone else has the power to grant or withhold these rights,
You've already lost.
you've lost the argument before you've even started. Okay, let's unpack this intense framework. We have to start with that foundational misconception. So, part one, human rights as species definition, not a prize. Xiaoyang Lin starts by analyzing this really common misconception around rights, the political dialogue that's all about demanding rights.
Which the author sees as just fundamentally flawed.
Complete.
I mean, if someone puts the question to you, do you want the rights of a person? And your response is an eager yes, please? Well, you've already implicitly agreed that those rights are an external commodity.
Something that can be negotiated.
Exactly. Something that can be transacted rather than something that is just inherent to you.
And this, as the author meticulously breaks it down, it directly contradicts the standard global definition we all know, the one in the 1948 UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
That's right. The UDHR is the baseline for this whole argument. It defines rights like life, liberty, property, freedom from fear as innate, universal. They belong to all human beings, period. No exceptions for geography, race, belief, or anything else.
They exist totally independent of the state. The state doesn't give them to you.
They don't confer them. They simply define the biological and philosophical status of being human.
But the logical trap Xiaoyang Lin points out is where this discussion gets really, really sharp. If you have to ask for something that is supposed to be innate,
then you're admitting the person you're asking has the authority to deny it.
right.
And the logical consequence of that, according to the source, is it's stark. The author insists that if you truly are a person, you possess these rights inherently. Full stop.
So if you admit, by the very act of begging or appealing for them, that you don't have them or that they've been taken away,
Then by the most rigorous legal and philosophical standards, you're essentially admitting that you are not, in fact, a complete person.
wow. That is a radical reclassification. It's not just about political suppression anymore. It's a statement about the nature of your being, your ontology.
It absolutely is. The conclusion, if you follow Xiaoyang Lin's logic, is that if a being is systematically denied or if they fail to exercise the foundational rights that define a human, say, the right to life or freedom of movement, that being is reduced. They become a tool or a slave.
The absence of what the author calls the standard configuration means you functionally fail the species test.
You fail the test.
I think we need to just pause here for a second because this is maybe the deepest cut the author makes. They're saying the denial of rights isn't just a political mistake. It's a logical reclassification that's forced on you. So how does the author handle the nuance here? What about people under duress, people who are politically oppressed? Doesn't the power structure often remove choice, regardless of an individual's inherent logical capacity?
That is the essential point of friction, isn't it? And the author addresses it by shifting the focus inward.
Yeah.
Xiaoyang Lin sees rights not just as protections, but as attributes that have to be active.
Active attributes.
So if you are politically oppressed, the power structure might classify you as subhuman, sure. But the question remains, Do you internally embody the qualifications of personhood?
Ah, I see.
If you do, then the external denial is just an act of force against a known truth. But if you do not embody those qualifications, if you've actually internalized that subservient role, then you are actively fulfilling the power structure's definition of you as a non-person.
So the fight isn't for a gift. The fight is for the fundamental capacity to operate as a self-aware, autonomous entity. This completely flips the easy political demand, I demand my rights.
It does.
It turns it into this much harder, deeply personal challenge. Am I truly a qualified person?
Exactly. The author uses the term standard configuration, or think of it like a human operating system. If you buy a complex piece of tech, a car or a computer, and the essential components, the CPU, the RAM, are missing, it's not a computer, it's just raw material.
It's just a box of parts.
Right. Xiaoyang Lin argues that human rights are the standard configuration of a human. And if your configuration is incomplete, if the freedom to choose, the capacity to bear consequences, the autonomy of movement are all gone, you are, by definition, functionally operating below the threshold of personhood.
You're an object.
You are at best an object waiting to be defined by an outside force, a government, a corporation, whatever it is.
And this is so compelling coming from an author with a scientific background. They're looking for logical self-consistency, just like a scientific theory demands it. If the definition of X is A, B, and C, and you don't have C.
You're not X. It's a stunningly hard line to take, but within that logical framework,
Yeah.
it's entirely consistent.
Okay, so if human rights are the non-negotiable attributes of a person, then the next logical step has to be to figure out the prerequisites for truly possessing them. And Xiaoyang Lin defines the essence of human rights as freedom, and the core of freedom as this duality, choice and responsibility. This moves us right into part 2, the hard thresholds of adulthood and personhood.
Yes, the author identifies 4 of these,
Yeah.
what's called the non-negotiable thresholds, that would shift a human being from a dependent creature, like a child or an object, into a fully qualified, autonomous person who is capable of possessing and exercising rights.
Let's start with the first one, the capability threshold. Threshold A, freedom of choice. What's the litmus test here?
The definition is very robust. True personhood requires the power of free choice. That means the conscious ability to judge what outcome is better or worse for yourself, and then making decisions based on that rational, objective judgment. This is the foundation of autonomy.
And we're not just talking about small choices like what to have for breakfast.
No. The source means strategic choices. Choices about your life path, your resources, your future contracts, the big stuff.
And the immediate logical consequence if that's taken away is the loss of freedom itself.
If that choice is systematically removed, whether by coercion, political force, or, and this is crucial, by economic monopoly, freedom is lost. If all the options available to you are basically the same, say there's only one big employer in your town or only one source of information, you don't really have a choice.
You're just reacting.
You're merely responding to a preset external stimulus. And if freedom is lost, the argument goes, then the functional capacity for human rights is also lost.
This feels like a moment where we need to push back a little on the author's strictness. I mean, does that mean a person who is financially dependent, say a student who relies on their parents or someone trapped in generational poverty, do they fail this personhood test because their choices are so limited by economic coercion, even if they're logically capable?
It's a great question. And I think Xiaoyang Lin would likely argue that while external constraints exist for absolutely everyone, the capacity for choice has to remain.
Okay.
So if that student maintains their logical judgment and their contract spirit, they understand the obligation and the cost of the support they're getting, they retain the internal qualification.
So their rights might be constrained by circumstance.
Right, but they haven't forfeited the qualification. Now, if they surrender their logical judgment entirely and just obey their financier because it's easier, then they start to fail the test. It's about maintaining that internal independence even when you're under duress.
That distinction between circumstance and internal forfeiture it's vital. But choice, as you said, comes with a price tag. And that's threshold B, the capacity for responsibility.
This is the absolute symmetry. The author insists that rights and obligations are 2 sides of the exact same coin. Freedom of choice is meaningless or, actually dangerous, unless it's coupled with the ability to bear the consequences of that choice.
And this is where, in Xiaoyang Lin's view, most modern individuals, especially those raised in what the author calls the power society structure, this is where they fail.
Massively.
And the requirement is sole accountability. You can't just outsource the bad outcomes.
Exactly. Whether the outcome is positive, you reap the immense benefit of a successful venture, or negative, you suffer financial loss, reputational damage, a penalty. The individual has to be the sole entity bearing that outcome. The failure of responsibility happens when an individual chooses to externalize the bitter consequences while keeping the sweet reward for themselves.
The source argues that people who shift blame, who use victimhood narratives to avoid the cost of their choices, are functionally forfeiting their own free choice.
They want the power, but they reject the corresponding cost.
So they're not equipped for a system based on freedom.
Right. A society built on individual choice needs individuals who will honor the consequence. That's what keeps the system stable. If accountability is constantly diffused or rejected, then trust just collapses and true freedom becomes impossible to maintain. This unwillingness to bear the consequences means society can't risk granting that person full autonomy.
Which moves us into the external realm, the third threshold, which is all about social function. Threshold C, contract spirit and credit, the social passport.
If responsibility is internal, your willingness to bear a loss, then contract spirit, or the oikosu, is external. It's your demonstrated reliability to society.
Xiaoyang Lin defines credit simply as the ability to keep your word, to honor a commitment you made today about a future action. The credit card analogy in the source is perfect for this. I mean, why does a bank lend you money?
It's not because they trust your morals.
No, it's because they trust your historical record of fulfilling contracts.
Right. They trust your accumulated credit. Contract spirit is the engine of all free transactions, of specialization, of large-scale cooperation. If you lack that credit, society logically has to revoke your choice in economic matters. They won't give you the loan, they won't go into business with you, and ultimately you're isolated because you can't reliably participate in the economic structure.
So Xiaoyang Lin is saying that without contract spirit, the whole complex infrastructure of human cooperation, the very thing that makes civilization efficient, it just can't function.
He breaks down.
Okay, so we have capability, which is choice, internal willingness, which is responsibility, and external reliability, which is credit. Now for the fourth threshold, the one that grounds all the others. Threshold D, the logic of belief and logic, the source of courage. This is where Xiaoyang Lin's scientific background really comes to the forefront.
This is the deep root of it all. The author asks, why would anyone dare to take on huge risks and responsibility, knowing the potential cost? And Xiaoyang Lin traces this courage back to belief, or
But this is defined really broadly, right? It's not just about religion.
Not at all. It's defined as a firm conviction in one's own logical judgment.
Logical self-consistency. They trust their own model of reality.
That's it. They've analyzed cause and effect, they've run the data in their head, and their logical model is internally consistent. This confidence in their own predictive power is what allows them to sign contracts, to commit huge resources, and to bear the risk of failure, because they believe their logical approach will ultimately lead to success. Or at the very least, they'll learn from the failure and adjust their logical model. This confidence is courage.
So what happens if you don't have this logical foundation? What's the counter-argument for people who just rely on experience?
Well, Xiaoyang Lin posits that those people, the ones without that logical conviction, they can't predict the future based on consistent principles. They can only rely on past, anecdotal experience.
And the problem with that?
The problem, as the author points out, is that experience isn't reproducible. The context changes, the variables all shift. Relying only on past experience in a world that's constantly evolving leads to uncertainty and eventually paralysis.
They become hesitant, risk-averse. They can't commit because they can't logically project what the consequences will be.
And if you don't dare to commit or take responsibility because you lack confidence in your own judgment, you become untrustworthy. You fail the contract spirit test because you fail the logic test first. Xiaoyang Lin sees this logical foundation as absolutely paramount. It's the bedrock on which all the other attributes of personhood, choice, responsibility, and credit are built. It's the core operating system that lets an individual function independently.
That is an incredibly high bar for personhood. I mean, it's arguably meritocratic. It demands logical rigor and absolute accountability.
It does.
So if these traits are the very definition of being human, why does the majority of society seem to fail these thresholds? And this brings us to part 3, where Xiaoyang Lin turns the focus from the individual to the political environment. The society of power, or NUSA.
The author suggests the system is actively, and I'd say intentionally, designed to prevent the maturity required for genuine personhood. It's a structure that doesn't just allow dependency, it fosters it.
Let's look at the foundational mechanism of control that Lynn identifies, the lie of power or the trap of familial structure. That's shown.
This is the classic authoritarian analogy that's been used throughout history. Autocrats legitimize their absolute rule by drawing a direct comparison between the state, Guo, and the family, Jia. In a healthy family unit, the parents are responsible for nearly everything. Safety, resources, big decisions. The children just need to obey.
And that's necessary for a small family structure, especially when the children are young. But when you scale that up to the national level, the analogy becomes a trap.
The ruler poses as the benevolent parent. They argue that centralized dictatorship is necessary to maintain stability and serve the greater family interest. But the crucial consequence, as Xiaoyang Lin stresses, is that this analogy systematically strips the citizens, the supposed children, of their need for and their capacity for choice and responsibility.
If the parent makes all the strategic decisions, the child only learns obedience. They never learn judgment.
Never. And this leads directly to the illusion of responsibility, subsection B. The dictator claims to be responsible, but the author finds this to be nothing more than performance art.
Performance art.
It is, because true responsibility is accountability. It's bearing the measurable consequences. While a leader might weep publicly over a disaster, they can't practically bear the cost of millions of individual failures or tragedies. If they monopolize the power, the ability to choose, they cannot, by any logical extension, fully monopolize the consequences of all those choices.
So they get to enjoy the sweet rewards of power, the wealth, the stability of their position, the praise, while the populace has to bear the bitter fruit of bad planning, of chaos, of economic stagnation that comes from those centralized, unchallenged decisions.
The accountability is systematically diffused and diluted across the masses, but the power remains centralized. This structural imbalance actively teaches the populace that their choices don't matter and their responsibility is irrelevant. Why would you bother learning logical self-consistency if the outcome is predetermined by the parent?
And this environment, which Xiaoyang Lin calls an experience community, is designed to inhibit the four thresholds we just talked about. This leads inevitably to the mass production of giant babies, or tier.
The giant baby is the adult who has failed to transition into true personhood. They're physically mature, but psychologically they're stuck in a state of dependency. And the author identifies specific environmental conditions that ensure this regression happens on a mass scale.
The first one is information emasculation.
Yes. For you to have logical judgment, you need objective data. Xiaoyang Lin notes that in the Power Society, the information environment, especially the internet, is saturated with censored positive energy or propaganda. It's designed to soothe you, not challenge you.
Right.
Furthermore, the source argues that advanced technology like AI, instead of being a tool for discovering objective truth, is often reduced to a fabrication tool. It's used to generate state-sanctioned narratives. This actively removes the raw data you need for logical self-consistency.
If it can't trust the input, you can't develop reliable logical judgment. The second mechanism is the suppression of dissent.
Any individual who manages, despite all of this, to develop independent thought and tries to point out the logical inconsistencies in the system, well, they're immediately classified as an instability factor.
Yeah.
And they're silenced. This removes the necessary intellectual friction and external peer review that is absolutely essential for refining your own logical model.
So the cumulative effect is, it's profound. Most citizens lose the ability to acquire real information, and because they're not allowed to make consequential judgments, they also lose the capacity to do so. They're never required to be responsible for their own direction.
And the result is this regression into dependency. The giant baby population waits to be fed, lacks the logical structure needed for independence, and has no contract spirit because they have never been allowed to make a meaningful, consequential contract in their lives.
So Xiaoyang Lin's conclusion for this critical chapter is truly devastating. In a society that is explicitly structured around this dependency model, individuals who truly meet the demanding criteria of personhood, those who possess logical self-consistency, courage, and contract spirit, are, by logical definition, extremely rare.
They are anomalies in a system that's designed to reject them. Which then brings us right back to the inherent right we talked about in part 1. If only the independent, responsible individual is qualified to be a person, and the society is actively filtering out independence and responsibility, then the population possessing the qualification for human rights is dramatically smaller than the population of biological humans.
Okay, we're shifting now from societal structure to really the pinnacle of individual liberation, communication. Part 4 is all about the communication chasm and the ultimate qualification, which Sha-Young Lin defines as the prerequisite for freedom of speech.
And before even talking about speech, the author grounds the argument in this scientific bedrock, highlighting the cognitive limitations that we all face. Sha-Young Lin uses their scientific background to remind us that we fundamentally live in a subjective reality.
This is such a powerful point that often gets just brushed aside in political debates. The objective world is only what our brain decodes from electrical signals. Grass isn't intrinsically green. The floor isn't fundamentally solid. We interpret signals based on our own unique biological and experiential history.
And because every single individual is trapped inside their own unique subjective reality, the author draws a crucial logical conclusion. Any attempt by a central power to unify thought, to impose a single ideology or dogma, is scientifically and logically absurd. It's trying to force billions of unique subjective brains to perceive the world in the exact same way.
Which just confirms the author's earlier critique. Thought unification is simply the enforcement of raw power. It's a means of control that has no basis in logical reality. It's an admission that the power structure can't win the argument logically, so it has to win by force.
And this inherent subjectivity leads to the central problem of communication, what Lin calls the communication chasm. Consensus is difficult because we all experience reality differently. Language and contract law were developed for precisely this reason, to bridge that subjective divide and establish reliable points of agreement.
So conflict, in many ways, is a failure to cross that subjective reality gap. And this is where Sha-Young Lin introduces this fascinating glimpse into the future, positing the potential role of AI.
The author suggests that AI could act as a kind of third-party payment for human communication. Think about a financial transaction. A third-party service, like a bank, ensures that both parties adhere to the contract.
Okay.
In communication, AI could act as a super translator. It could resolve subjective biases and ensure that the meaning the speaker intended is accurately understood by the listener, regardless of their internal cognitive differences.
Which would accelerate consensus, moving humanity toward what Sha-Young Lin calls a contract civilization.
Yes, a civilization built on maximum logical understanding and verifiable mutual commitment. But to get to that civilization, you need individuals who are qualified for the ultimate freedom, free speech.
And Sha-Young Lin is very clear that freedom of speech is not the simple luxury of saying whatever you want. It has profound, demanding preconditions, and they're all tied to individual independence.
The first prerequisite is immunity to harm. The author argues that a truly independent, logically self-consistent individual, a qualified person, is inherently robust. They are not emotionally injured or collapsed by a few offensive or challenging words.
Right. That fragility, the glass heart phenomenon that's so often seen in the power society.
Lin sees it as a direct symptom of dependency and a lack of logical rigor. If your internal logical model is weak, it can be shattered by an external challenge. If it's strong, you welcome the challenge as a chance to refine the model.
If you're a giant baby who expects the parent to protect you from harsh language or conflicting ideas, you fail the immunity test. You're just too fragile to wield the power of free speech effectively.
And the second prerequisite is accountability for speech.
Of course.
Speech is an action. And if we go back to the definition of personhood, actions require responsibility. The qualified individual has to adhere to the contract of speech, which means they're ready to stand behind their words and accept the intellectual, social, or legal consequences that might come from them.
So the conclusion here is that among the giant baby population, those who are emotionally fragile, who lack logical rigor, and who refuse to take responsibility, freedom of speech often degenerates.
It becomes an aggressive weapon. It's used for emotional discharge or intimidation rather than a refined tool for civilized, rational exchange and building consensus. You can't grant the ultimate freedom until the individual meets the logical and emotional maturity standards of personhood. To really understand the intensity of these logical prerequisites, we have to place them inside the author's broader historical context. And this brings us to part 5. Sha-Young Lin's grand theory of societal evolution, which really it underpins the entire argument about personhood.
Right. Sha-Young Lin, drawing on that scientific research methodology, views all of human history through the lens of individual consciousness liberation. And they insist that logic is the key driver of social development.
Logic, for the author, is what provides the self-consistency, the lot, that's necessary for two or more people to reach a consensus. And consensus, in turn, is the single most effective way to improve the efficiency of social cooperation. If we can agree on how the world works, we can build things much, much faster.
So speaking is ultimately an attempt to achieve that consensus, but the author is realistic about it. Speaking is just describing one's own subjective view until a logical listener accepts it.
And that's why Xiaoyang Lin frames their own writing, this entire analysis we're discussing, as an attempt to find readers, listeners like you, who have the logical rigor to understand and agree with the research. And by doing that, moving us toward a new, higher level of consensus.
The author even notes that public power, or tohi, is itself a form of consensus. But in the lower stages of social development, law is compulsory. It's enforced by fear, not agreement.
Society only progresses when public power becomes a consensus, when it operates like a self-evident scientific principle that everyone agrees on.
And this leads to the author's articulation of these historical milestones, the key moments that track the shift from group reliance to individual independence and consciousness liberation.
Xiaoyang Lin meticulously details how the chain of authority was logically dismantled over centuries. The first crack appears with Augustine in 413 AD and the City of God. This brought about the crucial separation of church and state, or Cormier.
Which meant that political power was no longer the only ideological authority?
Exactly. It planted the seed of open ideology. It suggested that spiritual truth and governmental control could operate in separate spheres. That's a profound step, allowing room for independent, non-state sanctioned thought to even exist.
Then came the practical limitation on physical power, the Magna Carta in 1215.
Which established that the king, the ultimate symbol of centralized power, was under the law. It's the first major contractual limitation on absolute unchecked power.
And this shift just accelerates dramatically with the Reformation.
Absolutely. Martin Luther and John Calvin in the 15th and 16th centuries, they led the charge. They further opened up individual ideology, and they transferred spiritual responsibility from the church hierarchy directly to the individual. This made rejecting the divine right of kings a common, internalized consensus instead of a radical fringe idea.
If God speaks directly to the individual, the king's claim to divine authority is instantly undermined.
It is. And finally, you get the philosophical formalization with John Locke in 1632, who explicitly argued that the monarch's power doesn't come from God at all. It only comes from the people's authorization.
And this is what Lin calls the Great Shift. The entire intellectual trajectory moves from collectivism, where the group's survival and the monarch's power are paramount, to individualism, where the inherent rights of the person are the foundation.
For Xiaoyang Lin, this transition from a group-centric ideology to an individual-centric logic is the true start of civilized society.
To help visualize this, the author provides this direct contrast between the power society and the civilized society. Let's use that diagram to break down the two models.
Okay. The power society, which the author places on the left, is defined by experience culture. It's a culture where past, non-reproducible examples dictate future action. It lacks scientific rigor.
And it's characterized by collectivism, which inevitably results in a lose-win dynamic. The powerful win, the dependents lose.
Yeah.
Powerful is top-down or shay. And the system is just plagued by uncertainty and chaos because it has no logical basis beyond centralized will.
Now, you compare that to the civilized society, which is driven by scientific culture. This model is rooted in individualism, driven by consensus, and structured by logical. Power flows bottom-up, shay, authorized and limited by the people.
The transition point is philosophical. It's solving the legitimacy problem of power by denying divine right and recognizing inherent human rights. And crucially, the goal of public power completely flips. It is no longer about maintaining order through force.
It is about maximizing overall freedom. And this is how the concept of law changes entirely. In a civilized society, Xiaoyang Lin defines law not as coercion, but as the contract between public power and the individual.
So it imposes a slight restriction on individual freedom. I can't steal your property, but only to ensure the maximization of overall freedom for everyone.
It is a logical contract designed to protect the independence of every individual, ensuring they can operate with their full standard configuration of personhood.
And this sophisticated framework lets Xiaoyang Lin make some truly radical predictions about the future of global governance, what the author calls the global village and the human OS, or HOS.
Xiaoyang Lin is emphatic about this. Individual freedom is the irreversible trajectory of humanity. The author predicts that in the future, the meaning and functionality of the nation-state will disappear.
Why?
because national laws, by their very nature of being confined and exclusionary, inherently impede freedom and cooperation on a global scale.
So borders and political allegiance just dissolve, and they're replaced by communities based on voluntary consensus.
Exactly. New communities will be based on shared aspirations and an absolute commitment to contract spirit forming this borderless global village. And to manage this, the world requires a unified legal baseline, an upgraded system rooted in the Magna Carta tradition that has already influenced major global charters.
And the author names this global legal baseline the Human Operating System, HOS.
This HOS will be fundamentally logic-based and will integrate AI governance. And Xiaoyang Lin predicts this will lead to the disappearance of the entire apparatus of the power society, the state, massive bureaucracy, corruption. The legal framework will simplify, defining crime only as the infringement of another person's freedom.
And the mechanism of enforcement is maybe the most unique part of this prediction. Punishment via information restriction managed by an AI.
It is a totally virtual, decentralized form of consequence. For heavy crimes, the AI limits the criminal's access layer in the virtual space. They're confined to a low-quality information network, cut off from the sophisticated flow of the contract civilization. Lighter crimes result in low to medium quality access. It's enforced by logic, not by violence.
But who decides the severity of the crime? That sounds like centralized power creeping back in.
Xiaoyang Lin addresses this with transparency and decentralization. The decision-making, the definition of crime severity, the punishment levels, is handled transparently by the affected netizens, the perpetrator, the victim, potential related parties. Only once this logical, community-based consensus is reached does the AI enforce the restriction. It is governance managed by contract and logical agreement, ensuring that power remains bottom-up, consistent with the civilized society model.
This has been an incredibly deep and frankly challenging exploration into the philosophical and sociological architecture designed by Xiaoyang Lin. The requirements for genuine personhood choice, responsibility, logical belief, and contract spirit, they're placed at a level that fundamentally challenges most modern political narratives.
It forces us to move past superficial demands and into profound self-assessment. The author's powerful conclusion just echoes through the entire analysis. Human rights are not a protective blanket or a free lunch provided by some generous guardian.
Yeah.
They are the earned prerogative of the adult. They're the steep price of dignity. They belong only to those who dare to think independently, achieve logical self-consistency, and are willing to bear all consequences for their choices.
And amidst all this intense logical structure, the author gives us this one final moment of poignant reflection. Tucked away with the source material was a simple handwritten note from Xiaoyang Lin.
It reads, "We spend our lives searching for a person who can speak to us, understand our words, and listen to our nonsense. How lucky one must be to find them."
That simple note just pulls this vast sociological discussion right back to the intimate personal struggle. The author spent this entire treatise arguing that logic and contract are necessary for consensus, and yet acknowledges that even finding one person who truly understands your subjective reality is a matter of immense luck. It just underscores the difficulty of communication, even with the highest logical rigor.
It's the humanizing element, isn't it?
Mm.
While logic defines the framework for a healthy society, connection defines the soul of it. The gap between logical agreement and emotional understanding, it remains vast.
So if being an independent, responsible, and logic-driven person is the absolute qualification for human rights, and if, as Xiaoyang Lin argues, our current power society is actively structured to mass-produce dependent giant babies, this leaves us with a provocative final thought for you, the learner, to consider. What specific, concrete steps in your daily information consumption, your commitment to your contracts, and your willingness to face consequences can you take today to ensure your own individual consciousness is liberated, allowing you to fully participate in the coming contract civilization the author predicts? Where do you choose to apply the cost of dignity?